Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 4, Monday Night Football edition. I'm your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, have you come down from the emotional high that was yet another signature performance from your man crush, Patrick Mahomes, in Sunday Night Football?
See, you just love to engage our listeners and rile them up.
That's what I'm here to do. I'm supposed to be the proverbial lightning rod and poke the bear whenever I get the opportunity.
Andy Reid was in his bag last night, and Patrick Mahomes executed to perfection, and the Chiefs O-line got the motivation it needed with Shaq Barrett's comments midweek. I had hinted at some underlying issues for this Buccaneers defense in our preview last Thursday, and boy, I didn't ever envision those issues being exploited that well. They were the only defense, the first three quarters, that were worse than the Lions yesterday, if you can believe that. I mean, it was ugly. Tampa's defense allowed 56% of the Chiefs' offensive plays to grade successful the first three quarters. The Chiefs were second in EPA per play over that same stretch. The only thing that stopped the Chiefs was Clyde Edwards-Helaire dropped walk-in touchdown on 4th and short there. That was masterful. He was wide open. The entire defense, too, if you watch, was going the opposite direction. Catch the ball, and that might get a little uglier.
When you watch that football game, too, it's amazing to see that Clyde Edwards-Helaire, at least on the depth chart, is still their number one back. It feels that it's just a matter of time, given the way Isaiah Pacheco runs, his explosive potential when he does have the ball in his hands, that he becomes the number one back in that offense, making him that much more explosive as we continue to move forward deeper into October and November.
He's not getting the touches, but he was pretty efficient, and he's been efficient. And I know the carries and the touches haven't quite been there. But Clyde Edwards-Helaire certainly understands the competition that's now in that backfield, it seems. Pacheco's just an interesting case study. I know in shorts at a combine, he looks fantastic, right? Runs a ridiculous 40 at his size and can catch the ball and can run hard. It's amazing how some of these players translate. If you remember, he was benched at Rutgers.
Sometimes there's nothing wrong with being benched at Rutgers, realizing you need a wake-up call against those elite Big Ten East and West defenses and having that light bulb go on when you become a member of the vaunted Kansas City offense and you have a mastermind like Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes to lean on to get you to the promised land.
Yeah, that's a little different, right? Definitely a little more offensive talent around him with the Kansas City Chiefs. And you're kind of seeing that with Rutgers' offense right now at the college level. Not much to be had there, although the play calling's been pretty good. It's been pretty imaginative. There's just not many horses there right now.
Yeah, always helps when you can think outside the box and you have players that are capable and able to go out there and execute. So as far as Monday shows are concerned around these parts, it's all about the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll do a little bit of looking ahead to the coming week, NFL Week 5, and how the betting markets have adjusted with yet another data point factored into the equation. The Good Doctor stops by and Deepak Chona to break down some of his injury updates to a lot of your marquee players across the National Football League and what it may mean for your fantasy team. And last but certainly not least, a breakdown of the Monday Night Football game between the 49ers and Rams. So, Payne, we kind of tipped our hand a little bit on what we saw in Sunday Night Football, and I think it goes into the good for Kansas City and the bad for the Tampa Bay Bucs defense. But as far as some of the other good that you saw unfold on Sunday, where's a good place to start?
It wasn't just yesterday either. I mean, no one's really talking about it, but I see you have the Lions-Seahawks shootout on your sheet here. But for me, it's the guy that's leading the shootout. It's Geno Smith. Absolutely ridiculous. Through 4 weeks, he's number one in completion percentage above expectation. Only trails Mahomes, Tua, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson in adjusted EPA per play. and you're looking at a sample, right? It's just 4 games, but we're 20% of the way through the season. It feels like he's turned back the clock a little bit, and you're looking at Geno Smith 2020 West Virginia all over again. I think it just boggles my mind because we've seen some interesting career paths and patterns. This one might be the most head-scratching. I mean, again, 4-game sample, but he has gone from unplayable the first 9 years in this league to arguably playing like the best quarterback in the league through 4 weeks. It's nutty to me to watch, and then the numbers bear it out.
How difficult is this to grasp when you consider that this was a run-first offense with Russell Wilson, who they used to go, hey, Russ, go out there and make magic on 3rd down in the 4th quarter. And here we are now with Pete Carroll dealing with Geno Smith as his starting quarterback, and it's a good old-fashioned gunslinging approach. Geno putting up gaudy numbers, and the Seahawks, they either scored a touchdown or attempted a field goal on every single one of their possessions yesterday until they took a knee to kind of bleed out the clock in the game's final seconds.
Did not punt once from a Geno Smith offense on the road at an interesting start time for a West Coast team. Just nothing you would have ever envisioned if we had this conversation at any point over the last 9 years. Apparently the light bulb came on at 31, year 10 in the league. But you are right. Right now, Seattle is above average in pass rate. And I think that's kind of the thing that makes you laugh a little bit is we'd been clamoring for that for years with Russell Wilson leading the way, and now it's Geno Smith that apparently has a little bit more carte blanche in terms of how much they're going to pass. And the run game was pretty efficient yesterday, too. That was working. That was humming. Everything was working yesterday against that Detroit Lion defense.
And while neither of those defenses will leave you brimming with confidence, I also have to give a hat tip to Dan Campbell and the Lions offense, who now leads the league in points per game despite a 1-3 record out of the gates. And they did so yesterday without arguably their top 2 weapons for sure, and maybe their top 3 if you throw DJ Chark in there. So pretty entertaining football game from start to finish. Always nice when one team goes over the total that was available entirely on their own in a 48-45 shootout. Payne, I want to go to Baltimore, and it's not necessarily give the Ravens credit because they got shut out in the second half by the Bills defense, but we talk all the time about coaching, clock management, decision-making, and I do want to come back to one part of the decision-making that factored into Buffalo winning the game 23-20, but the Bills perfectly coached, knew exactly what they needed to do over the course of running their 4-minute offense, 12 plays, 77 yards. They took 4:09 off the clock, and most importantly, Devin Singletary and Josh Allen got down inside the 1, allowed them to bleed the clock out, never letting Lamar Jackson get the football back with a chance to either win or tie in the game's final minute.
Yeah, there was a lot of meh and mediocre play among the winners in week 4. So when we're talking about this, we really had to dig deep to find some positives. The Bills are used to taking time off the clock and methodically moving the ball this season, so that really wasn't a change for them. But I think you give them credit, right? After poor situational football last week, right before the half against Miami that negated some points, when it counts most against Baltimore, they righted that wrong. And it was not just the endgame situation, but again, right before the end of the half, right? You think about that game, first half down 20-3 with 90 seconds to go. Buffalo goes on that 76-yard march to at least get themselves back in the game. And then the final drive, Josh Allen just went Superman. He only faced 2 second downs on that final drive. Obviously, the big one, of course, was 2nd 11, where he finds Devin Singletary, dumps it off for 16. It really felt like Baltimore executed as bad as humanly possible in the most critical moments yesterday. Lamar throws picks at times. You simply cannot throw them. The defense couldn't get stops in the biggest moment, and Buffalo steals a big conference win on the road despite being down 20-3. That's now, you think about Baltimore in this context. Second game in 4 weeks, Baltimore has blown a 3-score lead at home.
Yep.
You can't do those kind of things. And I know this is a team that we had a buy signal on, and certainly they should be 4-0 with all of the injuries. And now you're thinking to yourself, 4-0, commanding lead in the conference, going to continue to getting healthier. You liked what you saw from Dobbins in small doses. He continues to get a little bit more burn. Ronnie Stanley practiced a bunch last week, wasn't out there, but that's at least trending in the right direction. And so Baltimore, to me, has lost a golden opportunity. They have to create some leeway here before Deshaun Watson's able to get back. And this is just a tough conference to be giving away wins. I ultimately think when we look at those two conferences, and we think about the horsepower that's in the AFC, home field advantage is going to be massive.
That's now 5 straight losses in a building where it used to be damn near impossible to go in and beat the home team in the form of the Baltimore Ravens. And to your point, talking about doing it in improbable fashion when you're blowing 3-score leads against teams that you know are going to be your biggest competition within the AFC. Those are games you have to win. I do want to ask, and not for hot take purposes or anything else, but because I always value your input more in terms of X's and O's and situational football than what I see and a lot of the talking heads that are out there. John Harbaugh electing to go for it on 4th down rather than kick the field goal up 23-20. I know you're from the uber aggressive camp. Did you like what he was doing there, trying to get a touchdown? Kick the field goal. Okay.
Yeah. That instance, absolutely.
Always curious. I mean, I know sometimes the numbers suggest one thing, and so you play game situation and flow a little bit different. Wasn't sure what your takeaway there is. So
yeah, it's a little different when, part of the algorithm there is how many possessions are left in a game. And I think at that juncture, it's field goal. Let your defense in weather get you a final stop. I think that's the right play there. And it wasn't like a gimme, was it? If my recollection serves me, that was what, 4th and goal?
Yeah, from the 3? 3 or 4, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, right. I mean, it's a different conversation if we're sitting there and saying, hey, this is 4th and 1 from the 4, where we just need to pick up 1, and if we do, we drain out the clock and Buffalo never gets it back. That's not the thought process here. And then to make matters worse, we understand how well Lamar Jackson's played. MVP if we were to grade things after 3 weeks, but not just that drive, but go back to the prior interception. It's 1st down and you're in midfield in a tie game. Can't throw an interception there. And then in this instance, the decision for Harbaugh looks worse because you throw an interception in the back of the end zone. It's different if you just get stopped and Buffalo starts their possession on the 3-yard line, but they get it out to the 20 now because you threw a pick in the back of the end zone. If you throw it through, out the back of the end zone, I understand it's 4th down. You don't want to just give the game away. You want to fit it into a tight space. Hopefully it's a touchdown. Maybe you draw a PI. But the play call and the way they would attack is much different if Buffalo starts that possession on the 3 or 4 yard line as opposed to the 20.
Yeah, I think that's an important point that nobody seemed to address. That in that kind of situation, you always want to give your receiver and your skill position players a chance to go out there and make plays. But if you gun that ball into the stands, Buffalo is in the shadow of their own end zone. To your point, the play calling is significantly different, and that's a lot of the calculus that goes into decisions to go for it on 4th and short or 4th and goal inside the 5-yard line, that you leave your opponent in a very difficult spot. You can potentially force a 3 and out and still create a short field for you on a subsequent possession. So agree there. Always great to get your take on that. 2 individual performances that stood out for me, Payne. Justin Herbert, weaker move from a Jaguars debacle. He helped his Chargers team take control early. They did let the Houston Texans back into it. But Herbert, even against a much maligned Texans defense, 27 of 39 for 340 yards, had pass attempts to 10 different players. 8 ended with a catch as he continues to spread it around in the absence of Keenan Allen. And as far as the same division was concerned, you talk about a man who looks like he's running possessed with potential threats to his job security. Josh Jacobs, 28 for 144 on the ground with 2 touchdowns, 5 catches for 31 yards. And because of Jacobs' strong performance, the Raiders showed an ability to actually close a game, something that had been missing through the first couple of weeks with Josh McDaniels at the helm.
McDaniels was trying his best to get rid of Jacobs before the season started, and now he's the key cog in a must-win game after being called into the owner's office to explain the putrid 0-3 start. But Josh Jacobs was fantastic. Make no bones about it, and he was vital to the offensive execution, and getting that ground game going certainly helped Derek Carr in the pass game as well. But you look at some of the underlying metrics. Josh Jacobs was 26th in percentage of rushing yards over expectation among qualifying running backs this week. For me, the one thing you did see that was a touch different, the Raiders' offensive line finally looked like they played to an NFL standard. It's still not what anybody would envision for an offensive line or you would hope for, but 12th out of 30 NFL offenses in terms of EPA per play, and it was because Derek Carr wasn't under duress all game. It was because they were getting some push in the ground game. just a solid win for the Raiders yesterday. That was one of those games that kind of flipped on its head, and some of the weird things we're seeing in this market. Traditionally, Todd, that's a spot. That's a situation where professional bettors are all in agreement. We're all lining up on the Raiders. We're all trying to beat each other in line to bet that game. And about midweek, started hearing some difference of opinions where, hey, the number's just so far off of what we make this. We're starting to see some value in Denver, and if this were to get to 3, we would be intrigued by Denver. And suddenly that there's just this mindset that's different than what we had seen in prior years.
Betting market continues to evolve. There are a lot of different unique nuances, and so much around that 3 changes opinions, more so maybe this season than what we've ever seen in the past. And you wonder what it means going forward in terms of trying to combine, obviously, what the numbers suggest, the situational analysis, and then most importantly, often the X's and O's that are there. A game where the Raiders looked like they were going to be down at the break, found a way to make a couple plays, built some momentum, and really basically sucked the life out of the game for the Denver Broncos, other than the improbable 75-yard march where Denver was in the shadow of its own goal line when they cut it to a 2-point game. Anything else from the good category that you'd like to highlight before we have to make sure that we paint teams in a proper light that did not perform to high standards?
I watched the game, and I see Justin Herbert's on your list, so I think we can praise him just from the... you hate to use these words, right? Like they're kind of corny, but he was gutsy yesterday. I think that describes his performance. He's still not 100%, did look better. And I know there was a quote from Joe Lombardi in the middle of the week about not being as conservative and babying Herbert, and he was going to let him push the ball and be a little bit more aggressive. Austin Eckler was removed from the milk carton, so I'm sure fantasy owners loved that. But you saw 8 different players catch passes. Now, this wasn't like the most brilliant offensive performance. The Chargers, so far this week, they're outside the top 10 in EPA per pass and passing success rate. But in a game where the Chargers had to have a win, and when they started doing Chargers things late, trying to give the game away, Justin Herbert put the team on his back for that 12-play drive that cemented the win and certainly aided the cover there where, at the 8-minute mark, 3-point game, what's this going to be? Game's starting to trend the opposite direction. Momentum's in the Texans' favor, and Justin Herbert just kind of picked up some crucial first downs there, a couple big third downs, and then goes on this 6-minute drive that just ends the game.
Chargers needed it. We've seen that team blow leads in the past. We've seen them become their own worst enemy. You thought what could be a rocking chair for them, knowing the Texans took a little bit of money in the market at 27-7, got significantly closer than it needed to be before the Chargers escaped with a double-digit victory. All right, with the good comes the bad. I'm letting you kick things off in this category.
Baker Mayfield?
Well, you could say whatever you want. You could say whatever you want about Baker. By all means, take shots, and shots galore.
I subjected myself to that for about 3+ quarters. I think what makes that performance so bad is the situation. This is a spot where it was time to get healthy. Arizona's defense comes to town, 31st in schedule-adjusted efficiency. And your offense is relatively healthy. I understand you haven't spent a ton of time in this system, but we're now week 4. And somehow Carolina finished 30th out of the 30 offenses that played yesterday in EPA per play. And get this, they were more than 30% worse in EPA per play than the second worst offense. That's how horrific the Panthers were. And you start to feel bad for the defense because they were playing their balls off. They were all over the field the first 3 quarters, flying around, making plays. And eventually, Chin goes down with an injury. The defense gasses out. They spent 22 minutes on the field in the second half alone because that's how bad Carolina's offense was. I don't know what you do with Baker Mayfield at this point.
I don't know what you do with that offense in general. I mean, they just had so many quarterbacks that they've tried. Nobody has had it click. There are adequate weapons around them, and Baker Mayfield, from being inaccurate to getting passes batted down, I wasn't sure how many times he was going to drop back and throw it right into the teeth of that Arizona defense along the right side. So no doubt a tough watch. Arizona, I guess, gets a little bit of credit for sticking with it and finding another gear in the second half, albeit creating short fields with the Carolina defense, to your point, that looked absolutely gassed. Cleveland Browns, Payne, they roll up 400 yards, only muster 20 points in a loss to the Falcons, take penalties in plus territory, short on downs on an opening drive of the game. Did like the aggression from Kevin Stefanski, but a series first and goal from the Falcons won. They have to settle for a field goal of 29 yards, and they're unable to get Amari Cooper involved. We know this offense isn't going to be one known for chunk plays with Jacoby Brissett at the helm, but when you're down 23-20, you get the ball back with about 2 minutes to go, you have to find a way to get into field goal range against a plucky Falcon side and at least put a little bit of pressure on them.
Plucky. Is that what you said?
Plucky. Yep. Hey, it's a team that could be 3-1 if it wasn't for a fourth quarter collapse against the Saints.
I like that. Plucky. I watched this game intently, and for full transparency, we went over 46.5 last week. It reached 50, had some buyback from another group, and it was down to 47.5 at one point. And then on game day with very large limits, the group that played the over in the Lions game late morning also played this over, and that's why we ultimately closed 49. You mentioned some of the Browns' woes offensively. They were 1 for 4 in the red zone, including a turnover at the 2-yard line where you get 0 points. But you had that slow start, right? It was that 71-yard drive to start the game that ends in 0 for Cleveland, and then the 84-yard drive for Atlanta that ends in 3, and poof, the first quarter's gone. You look at Mariota and Brissett, neither of them played overly well. Neither receiver group played well. You mentioned Amari Cooper. He was non-existent, 1 catch. London and Pitts couldn't separate from sticky coverage, and yet, to your point, right, we sit here late fourth quarter with a chance still to get that game over. You're in plus territory. You have a field goal kicker that can boom them from a gazillion miles away, and you're indoors. And you're saying, hey, this game's going to get to 46, and we're heading to overtime, despite every single thing going against you. Frustrating, to say the least, how that one finished.
There is no doubt about that. Sometimes the late game variance works in your favor. Sometimes it takes a chunk out of your hide. That was a game that thought, even given a slowdown in the third quarter, had a chance to go over the total. I feel like I'm picking low-hanging fruit if I go after the Washington Commanders, Payne, so maybe this is the last week that I do it and I take them off this list because it's not bad when it's your baseline for how you're going to go out there and perform. Carson Wentz averages 3.5 yards per pass, threw the ball 42 times for well less than 200 yards. They were their own worst enemy, 11 penalties for 136 yards, and it was a side that took money from professional bettors. That's why you didn't see the Cowboys get out to 3.5 painted, despite it being the sportsbooks or one of the sportsbooks' biggest liabilities in the early games.
It's always the cat and mouse. It's always the decision-making processes behind the scenes that listeners don't really get a chance to know about. And this is one that we discussed at 3.5 going on, and we just kept coming back to, boy, is this a horrific matchup for the Commanders. We know the woes they're having pass blocking. We know Wentz struggles under pressure. You're down your starting center. We thought the O-line coming into the season downgraded just a little bit. And when I look at this team right now, we said this post-Lions game. From appearance, the Commanders looked like the worst team in the league. And then after 3 weeks heading into the Dallas game, Washington, in fact, had the worst schedule-adjusted efficiency in the league when you incorporate both sides of the ball. And nothing's going to change my mind or opinion after the Dallas game. And I can tell you, players on Washington's defense do not like Jack Del Rio. So we're approaching mutiny time there. And if that side of the ball is bad, the other side, led by Carson Wentz, isn't going to lead you to the promised land. So that is a very, very tumultuous situation in Washington. And all of the hopes, I think, and I've read some of the articles, right? We're going to reevaluate Chase Young because he was on the PUP for the first 4 weeks. Let's see what comes of that. But there are a lot of people saying that that's an injury that may trend towards the middle of the season. Maybe you get a boost of energy with Brian Robinson potentially returning, but there's just not much here right now. The offensive line's putrid, Carson Wentz is horrific, and the defense has underachieved, and most of the players do not like the defensive coordinator.
You mentioned Brian Robinson coming back, Carson Wentz underachieving, and I feel I have to ask this question because it'll allow for a logical segue into one of the other things that I think we need to discuss. if you're the Commanders at this point, you see how the season is gone, you know what you have or what you don't have in some cases with Carson Wentz, there's a possibility you could be drafting in the top 10. When do you potentially make the switch to a rookie quarterback in Sam Howell?
It's an interesting debate because your mindset would be we're going to transition to not win games, but I don't know if Sam Howell's any worse than Carson Wentz. You might actually improve. And so I don't know, right? You're playing in the NFC. No one's going to run away and hide this season.
Don't say that about the NFC East,
Philadelphia
Payne.
Eagles.
NFC East is the best division in football right now. You got a team that's 4-0 and a pair of 3-1 sides.
Yeah, that's not reality. But we like the Eagles, obviously. That's the team that we talked up and we understood what was going on there and started to get very great reports about Jalen Hurts about 3 months prior to the season, which was a little bit different than what we had heard at the beginning of the offseason. So that is the least shocking thing, seeing Philadelphia kind of crush some poor teams that they've played so far. But I don't know what the right answer is for Washington. I don't know. That just seems like a organization that is extremely dysfunctional, and it doesn't necessarily matter what coach or what quarterback is under center. It's a problem from the top down. And I don't know if you saw this surface, and it's completely left field and it's completely unrelated to anything, but there was images and videos surfacing from the VIP section of the Washington football stadium. And the chairs are just chewed up, eaten up. It looks like a dog's eating them. Just everything from top to bottom with that organization is an abject freaking disaster. So I don't know if you put Sam Howell in there. If you're the GM who drafted this guy, it's do I really want to subject him to that and kill his confidence right out of the chute? And what's crazy is Scott Turner's doing some decent things fundamentally right. We talk about this all the time, right? Play action rates, motion rates. There are some weapons here too. It's just not working.
Well, you mentioned the organizational failures, and when Daniel Snyder is the man calling all the shots, you can understand why they can't get out of their own way, but it's important. One of the videos that surfaced that he had a police cavalcade to take him out from underneath the stadium to protect him, and you can understand all the irate Commander fans who are subjected to this level of football. Week in, week out. The reason I brought up Sam Howell, though, is because one of his draft mates, Kenny Pickett, does make his NFL debut. He takes the Steelers out to a 20-10 lead. I know Pickett's stat lines aren't going to blow anybody away. He did show willingness to run when opportunity presented itself. But the reason I have this in the bad category, you're spending an inordinate amount of money on your stop unit. Your head coach is a defensive mind first and foremost, and with the game hanging in the balance at a 20-10 lead in your own building, you allow the Jets to convert multiple third downs and over their final 2 drives go 21 plays, covering 146 yards, both ending in touchdowns, and you let a win slip through your fingers when you're a field goal home favorite.
Not ideal, especially when you are paying that to the quarterback position, right? Trubisky came in on a very team-friendly deal, and then you have Kenny Pickett, who's on his rookie contract. It should depict a roster that's loaded everywhere else. And I think we've talked about this for a while now. The Steelers' defense for about the last 20 games has fallen off a cliff compared to where it finished in 2020. There's just not enough good players on the Steelers' defense. And I think we said something to the effect in our preview podcast that there's really 3 dudes on this defense. Everyone else is just kind of meh. And when you lose arguably the best defensive player in the world in TJ Watt, the Steelers' defense takes another dip significantly. I mean, down to down, you look yesterday, the Steelers were okay. The Jets were held below a 39% success rate, and you're thinking to yourself, hey, not bad. But they gave up too many explosives, to your point. There was a lot of third and longs there. There were a lot of second and longs where they gave up some big plays. And there's really no excuses when you put it in the context of having extra rest and prep to go against Zach Wilson in his first game back, where you would expect him to be a little bit rusty early.
It is interesting when you see Zach Wilson getting back out there, suddenly a receiver that rose to fantasy relevance late last season. I imagine there are plenty of Elijah Moore owners that were thrilled to see him become a focal point of the Jets offense. You do wonder how Zach Wilson and Garrett Wilson will go along, as that appeared to be the number one option for Joe Flacco. from the good, the bad, we obviously have the ugly. There were a couple different directions to go, and I don't want to spend a ton of time here, but I think, one of the things both you and I saw, albeit this team exceeded odds makers' expectations. They forced the game to overtime that I didn't think anyone was possible. But Payne, sometimes when you're outgunned, you're outmanned, you have to think outside the box and be a little bit aggressive. Ugly would define what the Patriots did offensively in their one series in overtime.
Yeah, you get the stop right out of the chute, and then you get the ball at midfield. And that pencil-chewing private sucker decided to run the ball into the middle of the line of scrimmage twice and then have Bailey Zappi on third down, who didn't really display pocket awareness or presence overly well yesterday. You got to put your guys in position to succeed, and that is your lone chance right there to go win the game, to get into field goal range. And you should be passing when they expect you not to pass. You could have broke tendency there on first down, through with play action, and someone would have been open, and it would have put Bailey Zappi in position to succeed. Instead, you thought it was better on 3rd and long to give Bailey Zappi the opportunity to throw the ball. That, to me, was horrific. That was the game. That was the drive. And in my mind, even if you play the punt and pin game, that was the hope, apparently. I felt like that should have been 4-down territory. And if you did it right and threw on first down, maybe you don't need to think that way. But that needed to be the drive. That was the game right there. That was the one where you said, hey, we're calling 4 downs here. We're going to make life easy for Bailey Zappi. And they just didn't do it. And this is what you get from an offense that's led by a former defensive coordinator that wasn't even good doing that.
Even if you don't throw on first down, and this is revisionist history, they had a successful run on first down. It was second intermediate. You should have the whole playbook at your disposal. To your point, if it becomes 4-down territory or if it even factors in the equation, second down, you have the Packers in a bit of conflict. They don't know if it's run or pass. You elect to run right into the line. And 3rd down and intermediate, a run's not coming. But we were kind of joking over text. I go, the hell with it. And 3rd down, maybe you run it again, set up 4th and 1 with the willingness to go.
Right.
If you're 2 or 3 yards away, figuring that if I give Aaron Rodgers and the Packers offense another chance in overtime, the math tells me that it's probably going to be an uphill battle. And you saw Rodgers convert on not 1 but 2 3rd downs in that drive before the Mason Crosby chip shot field goal for the win.
That had to be the drive. That was the one. Everything that you did defensively was good enough. Everything you did offensively was just good enough. And there you are at the 50-yard line. You need about another 20 yards to get into field goal range. And obviously that's not your goal, is to have a 47-yarder. You could have done more with it. But that's perfectly said, because once you do run it on 2nd down and you're sitting with 3rd and 5, we don't have to drop back in a standard fashion and hope that it's potentially incomplete and then punt it and pin. That's the point where, hell, you could have said, hey, this is going to be 4 downs. We can do whatever on this one as well. We can run a screen pass. We can actually run the ball. We can make this a 4-down game, and just nothing was good there in that series. It was just a lack of balls, candidly.
That is putting it mildly. Anything else ugly that you wanted to highlight? I did see you took a shot at your favorite NFL head coach on Thursday Night Football, Zach Taylor.
Yeah, he wasn't good. But the situation ended up unfolding pretty nicely, where I think anyone could have understood that, we know Byron Jones is out. He's on the PUP. And then when Xavier Howard, who we told you was a shell of himself dealing with a groin and hamstring injury, finally went out of the game, it was like, hey, maybe Higgins and Jamar Chase can dominate cornerback 3 and 4, and I should throw the ball a little bit more rather than hand it off to Pirine on 2nd and long. And once that light bulb came on 57 minutes into the game, the Cincinnati Bengals were able to score some points.
It provided a novel concept. I wasn't sure where Tyler Boyd was. Maybe he was in Witsec for the first half of that game rather than the Bengals trying to exploit the middle of the field. They, of course, find a little bit of separation, get a win, and we'll see the Bengals in Sunday Night Football, a game that we'll preview right here in a massive divisional showdown for the AFC North. against the Baltimore Ravens. You can follow Payne on Twitter. That's at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there as well. Most importantly, as always, follow all things Bet the Board at Bet the Board Pod. And if you haven't already done so, we tweeted it out last week. You go to our website, subscribe to the Bet the Board newsletter, a friendly reminder of all the great things we're doing throughout the course of football season, articles, additional prop bets, the Stay Green podcast, everything you've come to expect from the Bet the Board family. All right, my friend, let's go to look-ahead numbers, and we can bounce through these pretty quickly. New Orleans Saints, they were a 6-point favorite on a look-ahead number. They, of course, stubbed their toe in England, losing 28-25 to the Minnesota Vikings. The Seattle Seahawks get a big win that we talked about at the top, outlasting Detroit Lions 48-45. Injuries mounting for New Orleans. We'll have to monitor throughout the course of the week, but 6 down to 4 across secondary numbers.
I think most of it's injury, some of it's travel situation, but we just have to keep our eyes peeled on some of the injury reports. Is it Michael Thomas? Is he going to be up? Is it Jameis Winston? I thought Andy Dalton played pretty well yesterday, especially against a zone defense. And him and Olave looked like they were on the same page throughout the game. You got the run game going. So, I think this is a spot where New Orleans can have some offensive success. When you look at some of the guys offensively, you're thinking to yourself, anyone who returns is a little bit of a bonus, right? Alvin Kamara was close, so if he gets upgraded, that's a nice boost. Michael Thomas, I don't think, was overly close. I don't know if he's going to play or not, but ultimately, I think when you look at this game, New Orleans not in a terrible position with what they have offensively when you factor in the opponent here with the Seattle Seahawks defense, who just it's one of the worst defenses in the league.
It's a long way to go to get back to Legion of Boom category, that's for sure.
Yes, and I mean, again, Detroit went up and down the field yesterday without its two most dynamic weapons offensively, and Amon-Ra St. Brown and Swift.
Titans, road favorites. Game was a pick'em for their trip to the nation's capital to take on the Commanders. Now we're looking at 3, albeit a soft 3 at most of the prominent shops. I mean, we thought Titans stock hit rock bottom. We know they were taking a little bit of money against them in their game against the Colts, but I guess the Commanders were just that much worse that here we are with Mike Vrabel's bunch laying a full field goal on the road.
Yeah, tough spot to want to be in. I don't really like either of these teams, and I've made that well known, I think, throughout the last couple of weeks. So this one is interesting to me. It just feels like when you're assessing this game, it might require more than the X's and O's. And regardless if Tennessee's down, at least one of these teams has strong leadership. And ultimately, that might be the difference here.
Goes a long, long way to make sure you're buttoned up and you can do things that are required to win football games at this level. To your point, one team has displayed the aptitude to do that. One team has struggled in that particular department. Dolphins at the Jets, a divisional game in the AFC East. This one has moved. We saw the Dolphins as a 6-point favorite on the look-ahead number. Now down to 3. You can understand why in this one. Tua appears to be a long shot, at least as of now, to go. Zach Wilson, an upgrade over Joe Flacco. Wasn't sure if there was anything worth adding other than those 2 potential injuries at the quarterback position.
Yeah, that's basically it. You have quarterbacks moving in opposite directions. I don't know if Zach Wilson's an upgrade over Flacco. I think that's still TBD, but we certainly know there's potential for the upside there, right? He's mobile. He can help the offense in that element, and I think you have a game under your belt now. You go back home, and Miami's defense has some holes, and I think that's one thing that we've talked about. Now they do a good job blitzing, and so Jack Wilson will be under duress here, but I think you have to keep your eyes peeled to the Xavier Howard injury. That's kind of something that's been nagging him a little bit. You do get the extra time off the Thursday game, and to your point, a lot of this is Tua to Teddy. And I understand Thursday Night Football, if you just look at the metrics that way, Teddy was actually better in that game than Tua was. And the numbers probably in terms of like EPA are better if you have a review on the Teddy Bridgewater interception that wasn't actually an interception once you go look at replay. But Teddy's a a professional quarterback. I'd be interested to see how low this does get, but that's the reason for this movement.
I mean, it's a line that you've used to describe a number of quarterbacks and players in the past as it pertains to Zach Wilson. He may not have the same floor as Joe Flacco, but he potentially gives the Jets a much higher ceiling if that light bulb goes on, given his mobility in the pocket behind, let's not sugarcoat it, a very questionable offensive line at best for Robert Saleh's bunch. The Chargers, 1.5-point road favorites on a look ahead for their trip to Cleveland. It'll be the second straight game on the road. We're now out to a full field goal. Chargers beat the Texans. The Browns come up a bit short against the Atlanta Falcons in a game that's worth saying. They played without Jadeveon Clowney. They played without Myles Garrett, and they took substantial money from professional bettors against them that pushed that game much closer to a pick'em.
Yeah, the Chargers seem to play a little bit better on the road. We've had that discussion about their pricing, where at home they're priced like a home team and they don't really play like that because they don't have home field advantage, and then they get discounted when they go out on the road. And we saw that again yesterday against Houston. I don't know where this one ultimately closes, but you're right around a key number now, and there's a bunch of factors in terms of injury. Is Myles Garrett a go? Is Jadeveon Clowney a go? And ultimately, I think the injury report is going to dictate which side of three this game ultimately closes.
Makes a ton of sense. Tough to replace those kind of disruptors on the defensive side. If Justin Herbert has time in the pocket against second stringers along that Cleveland defensive line, it could bode well for the Chargers' offensive renaissance to continue. Patriots,
especially when you think about Rashawn Slater being out, right? Like having Myles Garrett there, it becomes this twofold factor.
Yeah, it changes things quite a bit. If Garrett can't go and there's no Rashawn Slater, allows Justin Herbert to sleep significantly easier later in the week before he makes a trip back across the country. Patriots, a pick'em on the look-ahead numbers. They'll welcome in a lot of their former coaches, specifically Matt Patricia. Now we're looking at New England, a full field goal favorite. We're not quite sure who their starting quarterback will be, if it's Brian Hoyer returning or if it's Bailey Zappi. But more importantly, plenty of questions abound for the Lions in relation to some of the skill position players that you highlighted earlier.
I think, again, you're sitting here around a number that's soft 3. The injury report's going to dictate where this ultimately closes. Now, Detroit's defense is very susceptible even to the run game, and New England's run game has been pretty efficient so far this season, even though we had some off-season woes and comments about the ground game not being overly, I would say, in line with what it had in previous years. But all of a sudden, that outside zone blocking scheme has come on strong to start the season, and New England actually has a very good rushing attack through the first 4 weeks. You would rely heavily upon that, no matter if it's Hoyer or Bailey Zappi. But to your point, the conversation of Bailey Zappi, Brian Hoyer, the conversation of Amon-Ra St. Brown, that will, I think, determine where this line ultimately heads. The rumor was that they were going to give DeAndre Swift another week off and then put that into the bye week and have him fully rested coming out. But at 1-3, is it time if DeAndre Swift says, hey, I'm good enough to go here? Do you throw him out there? We'll see.
Well, you mentioned injuries, and we have one of the best in the business to break down how some of the injuries from Week 4 and the ones that are lingering could play a role on the games that we'll see unfold during NFL Week 5, with specific relation to the Thursday Night Football affair between the Denver Broncos and the Indianapolis Colts.
Are you injured or are you hurt?
When injuries occur in the NFL, you need someone to call on.
If you're hurt, you can still play. If you're injured, you can't.
Let's check in with Dr. Deepak Chona, Stanford and Harvard-trained orthopedic sports surgeon and founder of Sports Med Analytics, the industry leader in data-driven injury analysis.
So are you hurt or are you injured?
All right, well, thank you, Todd. I am pumped today and every week to be bringing you your Bet the Board injury report. We got a bunch of big names on the list today, so we're going to dive right in. Starting with Jonathan Taylor. Now, they're saying concern for a high ankle sprain. From the video, it looked on the low to moderate severity end of the spectrum, and that sort of is in line with the comments that we were getting out of Indianapolis as well. Now, that injury averages 2 to 4 weeks for most position players. We'll get an MRI probably a Monday and then know a little bit more about the severity. Either way, you're looking unlikely to play Thursday night for Jonathan Taylor. again, these average 2 to 4 weeks. My guess is this is closer to the 2 side of that spectrum. However, 5 days is generally speaking far from enough to return from a high ankle sprain for a running back. Next up, another big running back, Javonte Williams. Now, the video looked most concerning for a sprain of one of the ligaments on the outside of the knee, potentially the LCL. Also, the PCL is a little bit at risk there. You can also get bone bruising or meniscus tearing with these, and that can slow down the recovery and sometimes require surgery as well. And with Javonte Williams not putting weight on it right after the injury, he was quickly downgraded to out from questionable. I'm certainly preparing for his absence, and if I had to guess, I'm certainly thinking multi-week absence. Now, we'll know a lot more once we get an MRI, but with Javonte Williams, this is pretty unfortunate news. Next, Treylon Burks. The mechanism suggests an ankle or a midfoot sprain. He was kind of catching a ball when a defender fell into his leg, and those would also be the most common reasons that he would be in a boot post-game. And there's, of course, a spectrum of injury here, but just the fact that he was on crutches, that alone indicates that he was having enough difficulty with either pain or swelling when he tried to bear weight that he'd probably be beating the averages if we saw him play week 5 in terms of his recovery timeline. Next up, Isaiah McKenzie. Now, he's in concussion protocol. The average for concussion protocol now is about 6 to 10 days, but the more recent data on that is kind of skewed towards the lower end. And as a result, the odds do slightly favor him playing week 5. There's not a huge performance impact, especially for wide receivers when they come back. And we saw this recently with T. Higgins, just right back to where he started. So this could linger into week 6, but most likely you're going to see Isaiah McKenzie out there next week. Next is Jahan Dotson. Now, he left the game with a pulled hamstring. They were down 2 possessions late, so he probably would have been unlikely to return off of injury anyway. But the fact that he was designated as questionable suggests that it probably wasn't so severe of a hamstring injury. Now, the average wide receiver hamstring takes 3 weeks. We'll get a better sense of what this all means when we get an MRI. But then usually with hamstrings, the key is looking at Thursday and Friday practice reports. Now, if we see, usually we'll see him rest on Wednesday. If we see him limited practice on Thursday and Friday, then that suggests a game time decision where he would probably play next week. However, if we're seeing anything less than a limited practice on Thursday, then it'll look unlikely to me that he will be in action this Sunday. And then next up, we got positive news on star running back Dalvin Cook. So the sideline reporter during the game said that Dalvin Cook had a partial dislocation of his shoulder last week. And the previous reporting on this had been that he had a full dislocation of his shoulder. And there's a subtle but major difference here in terms of its clinical impact. And the reason is that a full dislocation, if Cook had it, means he would be highly likely to recur, have that re-injured, and potentially put him out for the season. Now, when you look at a partial injury, that certainly does increase your re-injury risk compared to a non-injured shoulder, but it's not near the same level. It's probably less than half of the level of a full dislocation. So I'm reassured by that and the fact that Dalvin Cook's now wearing his harness, and things are looking up in Minnesota in my eyes there. Next is Dak Prescott, and we got a report from Adam Schefter yesterday saying that Dak did fracture his thumb. That was one of the 2 main injuries we were kind of debating between as the most common reasons for Dak to have had thumb surgery at this point. The fracture is actually good news because the other option was a ligament issue, and bone heals faster than a ligament. So this means full healing usually takes about 6 weeks. Dak is going to be around 4 weeks for if he tries to play week 5, which is reportedly his target. Now, it would be uncommon to see a player come back, especially a quarterback, come back in less than 5 weeks from a fracture. Not impossible, but I would lean towards week 6 as the most likely return, but I don't think it would be unreasonable to see Dak in week 5 now that we have a better sense of what his injury actually is. And we got to talk about Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa. Now, most of us saw last week him take a big hit to the head and then subsequently almost collapse on his way back into the huddle. Now, we were told at the time that was due to back spasms, and while that could be true, and I'm not really here to cast doubt on it, most people looking in retrospect at that video, including Harvard-trained neurosurgeon Myron Rolle, who weighed in on SportsCenter earlier this week, did think that was a concussion. And looking then at his response to the head injury that he had on Thursday with that pretty scary looking posturing, we are kind of thinking this is going to be treated like a second concussion. And in the span of course, 4 or 5 days, it's going to be probably taking quite a while for him to get over this. You have to get to a point where you have no symptoms at all. And especially if this truly is a second concussion, that could take somewhere around a month for Tua to clear all the testing, all the protocols, and just feel like his normal self. The thing is, with these concussions, it's going to be pretty unpredictable. So 2 to 4 weeks is what you often see, but in general, this one looked pretty severe, so I would guess closer to 4. And then last but not least, on the offensive side, J.K. Dobbins. Now, we saw J.K. Dobbins put up 2 touchdowns in the first quarter. He looked pretty good, pretty explosive, and very efficient. Now, the thing we have to remember is that J.K. Dobbins is still only 2 weeks into his ramp up, and he had major surgery. So usually this ramp up takes 4 weeks, and on the 4th week is when you see the full workload. It's unclear what the Baltimore Ravens' full workload for J.K. Dobbins ultimately will be, but he's clearly the most talented back in their team, and I think in another 2 weeks I'm going to be starting to put him back into my lineups with confidence. And then lastly, we have Joey Bosa. So Bosa, we found out, is having groin surgery. He's going to be out 8 to 10 weeks, and the key thing to point out here is that we'd expect it closer to the 8 than the 10. And the reason is just the NFL data on this injury does suggest a faster return. The other key point is that when players come back, they don't usually have much of a performance dip. They do take 2 to 4 games to ramp back up, and with Joey Bosa being as good as he is at baseline at pre-injury levels, you would expect him to still look like a stud even if he's an 80% player. So with Joey Bosa, good news overall. Again, probably 8 weeks and a quick ramp up around 2 to 3 games. And that is all for today's injury report. If you like what you're hearing, hit me up on Twitter at SportMDAnalysis and Instagram at SportsMedAnalytics. I'll turn it back over to you, Todd.
There is so much ground pain for Deepak to cover there. I thought it was fascinating when you look at a game that we thought was going to feature 2 of the best young running backs. A Thursday Night Football with Javonte Williams against Jonathan Taylor. Judging by that report, we probably won't get to see either of them out there, especially dealing with lower body injuries on a short week.
Obviously, a game will break down in a few days, but the game does lose a little bit of its luster with 2 key backs. We kind of knew Jonathan Taylor had an issue heading into this week. He was dealing with a little bit of an ankle, a little bit of a toe. And then obviously the Javonte Williams is a huge blow. Obviously, you have Melvin Gordon there. It's not, a massive drop-off. But 2 key cogs that will be out for Thursday Night Football.
Melvin's got to learn to hang on to the football. My Lord, hang on to that ball, my friend, as you get into the twilight of your career. If you don't have the burst, you're better off going down than handing the ball to Amik Robertson, who had the Raiders' first scoop and score, I believe, since 2019. Plenty of other running backs that were nicked up, so thank Deepak for clearing the air on some of that. Obviously, we'll wait and see who's actually available for Week 5. But before we get to Week 5, Payne, we do have one final game of the Week 4 slate. And that, of course, is the Rams and 49ers, where the 49ers are short home favorites, 1.5 more or less the consensus. We did see a couple of 2s pop this morning. Total in this game has experienced one-way traffic from a peak of 46.5-ish down to 42.5. Friends renew acquaintances in the head coaches between Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan. The Rams have been favored in each of the last 5 meetings until tonight, barring something unforeseen hitting the betting market. The 49ers, obvious revenge from an NFC title game and the infamous Tart takedown that could have secured passage to the second Super Bowl in 3 years for them. When you look at the Rams, they were able to snap a 6-game losing streak versus the 49ers, the first win in this series since 2018, and definitely the most meaningful one. But the 49ers still own a 6-0 record versus the Rams in the regular season, going back to 2019. And last year's 3 meetings, it was all about Cooper Kupp on one side and Deebo Samuel. That tandem combined for 64 touches and 7 touchdowns in the team's 3 matchups. Matthew Stafford, he's been surprisingly good from a trend standpoint on Monday Night Football, even better as an underdog. But Payne, Matthew Stafford ain't looked the part so far this season, dealing with turnover issues, and you can understand why he may be seeing ghosts and or demons in that pocket, knowing that the Rams' offensive line this year has been a far cry from that fortress that surrounded Stafford in their run to the Lombardi last year.
That is the first thing that pops when you watch the Rams and what the data suggests, and you look at the 49ers defense, it would suggest, right, that the Rams O-line is going to have their hands full tonight. And you're looking at a Rams offense right now that's 22nd in adjusted line yards. So they're not getting a ton of push in the ground game. Akers obviously dealing with some issues of his own, but he's 1.7 yards before first contact. That's outside the top 65 running backs. So he's not getting not much help there, And then you kind of just think about this, Whitworth retires. Saffold signs with Buffalo. Austin Colbert signs with Carolina. So the O-line, I think we knew coming into the season, had downgraded a little bit. And then tonight, I don't know if you've seen this, Brian Allen, the starting center, is out. Starting guard David Edwards is out. And you have a 49ers defense that's 3rd in rush efficiency. And I think the assumption is maybe that creates a pass funnel offense. That could come true. But Sean McVay kind of has this philosophy where he believes you have to run to set up play action. And you look over the course of time, like the Rams offense isn't inordinately pass happy. But I think what's interesting tonight is if you assume the Rams pass a little bit more, you have a 49ers defense that's best in the NFL in getting pressure without blitzing. And we talk about that all the time being the ideal combination where you can make the quarterback uncomfortable but not be exposed on the back end. And I think that's critical when you think about Matthew Stafford's mindset because he has always been the guy that wants to attack the attacker and push it downfield. But San Francisco doesn't blitz, which is something you don't want to do against Matthew Stafford. But here's the other thing that's kind of odd to me is Stafford's been pressured on 29% of his dropbacks. Doesn't seem too crazy on the surface, but defenses understand that you don't blitz him. So he's only been blitzed on 18% of those dropbacks. That's well above average compared to the blitz rate, right? The pressure rate. The other thing that's a little interesting here is the Rams offense hasn't been explosive at all. Stafford has the 7th lowest intended air yards. So it's this combination of you do have some new look defenses that are playing substantially different than they had in years past. You haven't really found that ancillary option past Cooper Kupp. And then maybe there's a little elbow factor here. Whatever it is, you're looking at Matthew Stafford. He's got a 15 passer rating on throws of 15 plus yards. And if he throws short, because the pressure's coming, because we haven't seen wide receivers be able to separate all that well past Cooper Kupp, the 49ers defense, number 1 in the NFL in throws less than 15 air yards. So they've done a fantastic job rallying to some of those short passes. You also think about this, Todd. The 3 defenses the Rams have played, 31st Arizona, 27th Atlanta. The lone good defense in Buffalo the Rams played also gets pressure without blitzing, and they held Stafford to the 2nd worst adjusted EPA per play week 1.
It's a lot to try and process. I mean, because you talked about it, Sean McVay's commitment to the ground game, you almost wonder if it's chicken and an egg situation because the Rams have had miscues. They've been plagued by turnovers so far. They also have the 30th ranked running game. If you can't run block, you can't pass block. It doesn't leave a lot of options at your disposal to try and go out there and attack a San Francisco defense that for all the questions and concerns we have about the 49ers so far, and we'll get to the other side of the ball, the defense has not been that issue. I think they've gone out and addressed their secondary. Clearly last year when you look at the meetings, it was all about Cooper Kupp. He had 100-plus receiving yards in all 3 games versus the Niners. First player in NFL history with 300 three 100-yard receiving games versus one opponent in a single season. So the 49ers in the film room will figure out what they need to try and do, or they'll treat it like the New York Knicks used to handle Michael Jordan. We know how well that worked for them. Let him get his 50 and just take away all of the other offensive options. On the other side of the ball, though, Payne, plenty of questions for the 49ers, as it was anything but a gold rush in Denver. They committed a turnover in each of the final two possessions, including a Jimmy Garoppolo interception with a little over 2 minutes to go. 0.71 points per drive, 10 points on 14 drives was their fewest in any game since 2017. 9 3-and-outs they were able to force defensively, which again gives credit to the 49ers. But this offense clearly is experiencing an identity crisis, and it has become a true mash unit as far as able-bodied running backs, at least behind Jeff Wilson coming into this game.
Yeah, I think that's really the interesting part of this matchup is what is San Francisco's defense compared to what the Rams are, San Francisco's offense compared to what the Rams are putting out there defensively. And I think that's the element here that a lot of people need to start thinking about as we get to weeks 4 and 5 is really factoring in schedule. And you do look at this Rams defense where there's question marks and the production hasn't been great, but they played Buffalo indoors. They played Kyler indoors. They played the most efficient offense through 3 weeks in Atlanta indoors. And now all of a sudden you're dropping down a little bit in class. It's outdoors. There's also starting to be some weird internal noise from San Francisco about the offense not being as creative this season. I am hearing that from people close to this team. Is it Mike McDaniel gone? I don't know. But like at its core right now, the 49ers are a run-first offense. And you hit this perfectly, Todd. They're without its number one running back. And you're without your all-world left tackle. And I think there were some serious concerns that we had coming into the season about the interior of the 49ers offensive line being down a couple notches when you think about, Jake Brendel and Spencer Buford starting the season there. So now you're really, think down a couple notches on that offensive line. San Francisco's 20th in rushing efficiency. That's not something you would envision when you talk about a Kyle Shanahan offense, but we know Mike McDaniel's been lauded as like one of the best run game minds there is. And you also have Jimmy G right now, not really being put in the best positions. I mean, right now, if you look early season, small sample, 34% of Jimmy G's passes are in third down situations. So I understand that you want to be a run-first offense, but the run game isn't efficient. And so now all of a sudden you're asking Jimmy G to drop back and pass in third and known passing situations. It's not the best combination there. You also have this element where certainly Jimmy G's familiar with this system, but he's still kind of working his way back. He returned to practice exactly a month ago. And then he gets thrown into the fire week 2, does a fantastic job, obviously, when Lance goes down. But you think about that situation. There's no pressure. No one expects anything out of him, right? And the 49ers are leading when he gets in the game. He's at home. It's against a Seattle secondary. It's 31st in defensive pass efficiency. Like, there's not a world in the world there. So I think this is really interesting on this side of the ball. There could be some variance, but I just feel like the Rams are dropping down in class a little bit. And I'm not quite sure what we're going to get out of the 49ers offense. Now, the Rams are without David Long and Troy Hill in the secondary. And obviously, like most weeks, that's a bad thing. And certainly the 49ers have some weapons out wide. But I don't know if it's terrible if you're giving up, the 5-6 yard passes. I don't think those are going to kill you. Turnovers will. And the Rams are dead last in generating pressure. Jimmy G, extremely sensitive to pressure. Sometimes these aren't bad things for unders, right? It sounds weird, and I think we'll all kind of remember, Atlanta and Cleveland, right? That the turnovers inside the red zone that kill overs, but on average, turnovers cause more scoring than they actually negate it. So not being able to get a ton of pressure here might not be the worst thing for an under when you think about how sensitive Jimmy G is to pressure. So I think this is really an interesting matchup here. Obviously, you do have a wrecker still in Aaron Donald, and we're talking about some of the issues on the interior of the 49ers offensive line. I think points are at a premium tonight. I know it feels weird that you're seeing a McVay-Shanahan game at 42.5, and I'll just be honest, like we made the game 41-9. And a lot of other groups felt the same way, and that's why a week ago at this very time, or a little bit before it, there was a massive move under 46 on this game. And it wasn't just us. There was another group that came in and said, hey, we're okay with 44.5. Now at 42.5, it's certainly a little bit of a different situation, and that's why we navigated the waters a little bit and gravitated towards the first half for the Thursday podcast as our best bet. So I just wanted to kind of break down this game a little bit more in depth, knowing that we all have a position on this one in the first half, Todd.
No, for sure. And I think you did an eloquent job doing that. And when you mentioned Aaron Donald, what I found fascinating is that the 49ers last year did find a way to scheme Aaron Donald out of the Rams' defensive game plan, relatively speaking. In 3 matchups, he had 0 sacks against them. And when you look at his pressure rate, a shade more than 8%, down from the 13.2% pressure rate he was able to generate in all of their games. So we'll see if the 49ers' questions along the offensive line allow them to have that same level of success. And I have to ask a question here, Payne, that I know you're going to get angry about, but I'm going to do it anyways because I'm sure our listeners are going to ask. If they didn't grab the best of the number in the first half at 21, is there still value and opportunity for them to make a smaller bet at 20.5 that's widely available?
I do hate when you ask that question. I say yes, the game falls 21, right? That's why I hate the question. But in general...
No, then that's a simple answer. That's why I asked.
Right. No. I'm just... But in general, right? Like, we've run the numbers because there was... we're in this Twitter sphere where everyone has a voice, and that's okay.
It's not usually a good thing. Let's not sugarcoat it. It's not usually a good thing that everyone has a voice.
So, you get people that are in the comments like, I can't get 21, and then like... if you're doing this professionally, like 27 hours after the Thursday show released, like Chris Pinnacle, like everyone that can allow you to get substantial money down, we're all 21. But yes, you look at the data, and the data suggests, even though our brain says 21, 3 touchdowns, right? We think of these things in multiples of 7. Since the start of the 2020 season, so we're talking 2 seasons plus 3 weeks this season, like 21 is the 16th most relevant number. And, 23 and 24 and, those things are a little bit, 20.5, that's certainly the more impactful number. So, again, like I don't think you've completely missed the boat here, but our luck is obviously, pound it under 20.5 and it lands 21. And, I don't want that happening. So, the best bet was given out on Thursday. Yep. It's at 21. Do I think it's horrific going under 20.5? No, but I think maybe the smart play is understanding that the public has yet to get involved in this game at 7:50 Pacific time, and you probably have a chance. The more prudent move is just waiting.
Yeah, and
let the public get involved in this game. Let them get off work. Let them bet the over because they see McVay and Shanahan, and that's the approach I would take because I don't see this getting under 20.5. So when you kind of assess your asymmetric risk here, I would think that at this point, waiting to get 21 again, if your goal is the best of the number, even though, again, it's not the most relevant number, it's just waiting for the public to get out of work who ultimately will decide to bet this game over, and you probably have a chance at that 21 again.
And there are 21s out there, I should say. I mean, if you shop around, there are 21s out there, not only out here in the desert, but in the market. I just wanted to kind of ask that question. Shout out to you, though. I think it's the first time in the history of doing this podcast, going back to 2014, that you reference time in Pacific time zone at 7:50 instead of saying it was 10:50 Eastern. So you're coming around to my West Coast way of life, so I applaud you for that.
Yes, and somehow we've managed to go over an hour on a Monday podcast.
Had no idea. I mean, had no idea how that was even possible. A joke before the show with you that we could get in and out of here in 25 minutes. Famous last words for me. All right, we've done enough damage for a Monday. It's time to go about our days, as I'm sure our listeners feel the same way. Professional breakdown is always from you on the Monday Night Football game, further supporting the logic of the best bet that we gave out last Thursday. To our loyal listeners, want to encourage all of them to follow you on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. for all things Bet the Board related. We'll be back with you on Wednesday for the College Football Podcast featuring Brad Powers, and of course back with the National Football League on Thursday with a couple of the marquee matchups on the slate for Week 5. Best of luck with all of your Monday Night Football investments, and with the first half under ticket in hand, we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.